Okay. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. So if you would like to take a seat, please do so. Thank you for the audience members for being here. Thank you for our creators for being here. We're very excited. We'll start with introductions. So my name is Sophia Garau. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Community Outreach Coordinator for the Sexual Health and Information Coalition. Thank you. And so this is our Let's Get Vocal Conversations with Creators of Audio Erotica panel. So if you all would like to introduce yourselves one by one, name, how long you've been in the industry, things like that. Just a quick introduction.
Yeah, I can go ahead and get started. My name's Amanda Marie. My pronouns are she, her. I've been doing audio erotica for about a year and a half now and started with content creation that then transitioned into audio erotica.
Wonderful.
My name is Cera Gibson. I hope you guys can hear me okay.
Yeah.
I have been making audio erotica for about 2.5 almost years now, and I'm a musician and content creator outside of that.
My name is Tempest Mensah. I've been making audio erotica for about a year, but under this name has been a bit more recent, and I've been an audiobook narrator for about 3 years. My pronouns are she, her.
Hello, I'm John York. I've been a voice actor and audiobook narrator for around 8 years. My pronouns are he, him, and yeah, I started doing audio erotica just under a year ago, so I'm still quite new to this whole world. But yeah, I've been doing romance audiobooks and all that sort of thing for a few years now.
Wonderful. And for our audience, there are signs with QR codes to learn more about our panelists on both of those columns. So feel free to scan those. It'll take you to their information so you can follow them and whatnot. So without further ado, let's get started. I think we should begin with kind of a general, what is audio erotica? I think a lot of people aren't sure quite what that necessarily means. So if anyone feels like they're ready to jump in with that definition, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I can jump in. Audio erotica is pretty much audio pornography. Most of the time, it's a second-person direct-to-listener narrative where the listener is actually part of the exchange. And us as the actors, we are creating this world that you get to mentally participate in that ends up going into a sexual interaction.
That is a very concise and wonderful, well said description. Does anyone have anything else they want to add to that? All right. Well, glad we've got that covered. So let's start with sexual wellness and how audio erotica plays into that. So why is sexual wellness important, and how does it fit into the larger wellness conversation?
It's all important. It's all relevant. It's all connected. In order to have sex, in order to be intimate, in order to want to engage in intimacy with yourself or with another person or people, you need to be experiencing sexual wellness, which can look like so many different things. But if there is any sort of disconnect between you and your body or you and intimacy, trying to heal that and find what feels good for you, what feels safe for you, and gives you language and dialogue around sexual wellness is only going to improve your sexual experiences, both with yourself or with others. And so I think audio erotica really allows for that because it's done privately, it's done by yourself, and you are allowed to explore what feels good for you, what sounds good to you, what stirs a reaction, or the opposite of that. You can learn, oh, I don't like this. Oh, this doesn't feel good for me, and gaining that experience, gaining that dialogue and that language just improves your overall sexual wellness and experiences.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that the figuring out and having a space safe to do so is so crucial, and I think that's one of the things that makes audio erotica special here. Also, if anyone at any point has wants to jump in, please do. This is very informal. So if you have
Okay.
thoughts, just yeah.
We're all very rigid
Then-
right now because we're like, when do we need to speak?
Whenever the mood hits.
Okay, so I love Amanda's response to that one, and so I'll just add that as somebody who grew up experiencing like, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, but grew up experiencing a lot of shame around things like sex and sexuality and how difficult a conversation it was to have. I think that to suppress or deny that aspect of ourselves is denying an aspect of the human experience, and that only serves to further build a foundation for things like bigotry and oppression. And it just becomes another mechanism to kind of hold people down, hold people back. And shame is one of the most psychologically painful emotions to experience. And so to experience it around something that can come up inside of us pretty much every day in some shape, form, or another, I think it's just really damaging to us as human beings and gets in the way of that intimacy that Amanda was talking about.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I grew up in a very conservative Christian fundamentalist environment. And as a queer woman, my relationship with sex and myself and my sexual wellness, it was like immediately integrated into like my shame cycle as a human being. So when I'm thinking about sexual wellness broadly, I feel like it's so many things. I feel like it's your connection with your body, with your mind. It's like your emotional connection with yourself and like how you view your desires in relation to your identity as well and what that means in the larger world. And so, like Amanda was saying, is audio erotica definitely gives you that safe space where it's shame-free. There's no observers to just engage in sexual relationship with yourself.
Another thing I want to add is sexual wellness changes over your lifespan. So when you're young and first exploring and first developing, it's going to look and feel one way, but for a AFAB woman or somebody who is able to give birth and then experiences the change in body and hormones after birth, their relationship with intimacy and sexuality and sexual wellness is going to change, and it's going to look and feel different oftentimes, not always, but also exploration of sexuality, sexual identity and gender identity is also changing for a lot of people throughout the span of their lives. And so how they then choose to engage with sex and who they choose to engage in sex with can change. And if you have only had one certain type of sexual experience and then you decide you want to maybe explore others, you may not know how to do that or how to start or what that could look like. And I feel like the safety in the community around audio erotica and that intimate and personal and unique journey can allow for such a compelling and positive space for any individual, no matter how sexuality and intimacy shows up in their life. It allows such a variety of experiences for an individual or people to explore.
I think as well, it just sort of following on to that, because I couldn't agree more. For me anyway, about audio erotica, there's so much more sort of room for self-expression because it is a form of self-care, really. As we've been saying. So I think it's because it's less transactional than traditional mediums of it. And it's less sort of comparison based and more you're able to take manners into your own head, into your own heart and lead very much. It's a very sort of selfless sort of pursuit, really, I find. But yeah, just tremendously much more positive than alternative methods that we can be used to.
Yeah, so that raises a wonderful point about how historically most forms of pornography have been largely visual based. And we've talked already a little bit about why it's important to introduce alternative types of pornography like audio erotica. But if I think my question here would be, how do we, recognize the distinction between visual porn and then alternative types? And then what does that mean in terms of consumption? Like, how does that art form differ?
So it's incredibly different. It's just like an entirely different experience. In terms of visual pornography, I feel like that tends to elicit the same kind of dopamine response in a lot of people as like drugs and other addictive substances, or even like your phone screen, because you're getting that visual stimulation, you're getting those sexual feelings, you're releasing dopamine, and it's kind of creating this like pathway in your brain of I see this, I feel this. And that's why, even though there's nothing like inherently wrong with visual pornography, you can see through studies over the years that a lot of people, especially men, experience a lot of sexual dysfunction because of pornography. It's like, if I'm not seeing this specific thing, whether it's like my penis looks different than this penis, or that I need to see or participate in this particular sexual act, I can't get off. And I know for myself, I've dated men who've even wanted to watch pornography when actually like engaging in sex. I think with audio erotica, like we've already kind of said, is it's taking this experience and it's forcing you to fully engage with it. You can't really check out and still engage fully in the erotic experience the way you could put on an audiobook and kind of check out and just like passively consume the audio. And I mean, you could, but if your goal is to masturbate to it, you have to be fully there. And so what that means is, you know, creating this picture in your head when the actor is telling you certain places to touch on your body and certain things to think about. You are the person guiding that hand. You are the person like creating this action. And so therefore, when you are feeling good things, when you're having that dopamine response, it's because of things that you are actively doing. And I think that's a much more grounding, and for a lot of people, a much healthier experience than visual pornography, and just all around entirely different.
I also think another really valuable distinction between the two is the greater amount of inclusivity that is allowed when you include audio porn as a part of your sexual experience. Not everybody can watch visual porn. Not everybody wants to watch visual porn. And so when you bring in a different form of media consumption in the form of audio erotica, you may be somebody who has watched visual porn and never thought to listen to it, but then you switch to listening to it and you go, oh, this is really for me, because so much of visual porn is for men, and it's there's a disconnect from the viewer. You are watching something happen, whereas audio erotica is for you. Most of the pieces you're going to listen to should ideally be made with the listener in mind, with the listener's pleasure, comfort, safety, desires, wants, limitations, all these things. With most of the creators that I know are always included in their pieces. And so I think inclusivity makes a huge difference in why audio erotica is so beneficial in this space.
In terms of that difference again between like the largely like being visual based versus audio, when I was considering the question, it made me think about the difference between watching a movie versus reading a book, right? We've seen so many book adaptations, right? And when one reads a book or when one listens to audio erotica, it's actually more of a co-creation type of experience. Like the creator's voice is guiding you, like Cera mentioned, but it's up to your imagination to kind of fill in those blanks. And like there'll be sound effects and in terms of like where you're at and what you're doing and how everything is unfolding. But it's your imagination that is really building that experience for you. And it's the same thing with when you read a book versus what we see visually when we watch things online. And I think that that is a very key facet because, as Amanda said, you're drawn into it. You're a part of it in a lot of cases. Even for the audios where you're technically overhearing, you are also a character in what's happening here. And yeah, I think that that's really the big piece for me. There's a level of intimacy there that happens with myself, but also in a very asynchronous way, like between me and my imagination and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great point. And I think that it's like that immersiveness within it cannot be overstated, really. I mean, I can only speak about this from a guy's perspective, but I for most of my life could only really see what was in front of me, and I maybe underestimated how enjoyable your imagination can be. So when sort of exploring this world for like the first time, it was that, like, finding out that you can read the book when all you've known is TikTok videos, and now hang on a second, you can get immersed in this whole, like, my mind can do this for me and it can take me to these places. And also, I mean, just on a personal level and stuff, the enjoyment within, like, the idea of serving somebody else, which isn't always obvious in traditional pornography. It's always about it. Most of the time it's like a guy getting what they want, or seeming, not to generalize grossly, but mostly it's like that. But then actually finding out that there's this whole place where it's like you can get so much more enjoyment from being like a part of something and serving, and I don't know, it just brings so much more joy to the whole process, and joy to the whole, joy to the bedroom, which I think helps then create a healthier respect to partnership and to sensuality and all the rest of it.
I do want to add something onto that where typical visual porn is made for men. Not always, not all of it, and not, there are aspects of it that aren't. But when we think of visual porn, we are thinking of the male gaze. We're thinking that men are going to be the consumers of this. And I would hope that we all know how harmful that is and know the research on how much harm that does, especially, because Cera started with that. Um, in this world, it's for women. Anybody can listen to it, anyone can enjoy it, but to see something that is centered around women is really beautiful. And to listen to something where the listener, who in audio erotica is very often a woman, it's such a stark contrast. And it's been really cool to see it develop over the last few years and watch it change and adapt and take on so many different forms that are so completely separate from visual porn, where the male gaze is the driving force in what is created.
Yeah, I think that's really lovely. And I think a really interesting kind of side effect of the fact that so much audio erotica is very much the female gaze is when I make audios for men, I'm speaking to men through like my perception of men and like how I view men erotically. And I've had a lot of men reach out to me and be like, I never knew that women thought about us like this. Like, this ended up being so incredibly healing to not just be like an objectified penis, but to be the full package of like a human being with emotions that need care and are considered even within like an audio format. So even though I think that, well, I don't think the vast majority of audio erotica is geared towards women, even the audio erotica geared towards men, I think is relatively healing because we get to let down that pornographic veneer a little bit.
Yeah, those are wonderful points, and I think we're gearing towards the conversation, the greater conversation of diversity and inclusion in audio erotica. And Tempest, I know this is primarily, you have a lot of work in DEI, and I actually have a question for you geared towards that later. But what does diversity and inclusion look like in audio erotica specifically? How do you incorporate it when you're in the process of whether it's writing, recording, editing, anything like that? How do you incorporate inclusion and diversity into your work?
I feel like I keep answering first, but I will. I do my very best to be as non-specific as possible. Like, I don't want to be like, how explicit can I be? I'm fighting myself here. Oh, I
Go
can't.
for it.
Oh, go for it. Okay. So it's like, I try not to be like your giant titties, or like your big fat cock. And instead, more so like talk about like my experience like engaging with their body and how good they feel, no matter the particular proportions of the body. I also try not to say things that would like allude to a particular race. Sometimes I make narrative audios, and the first one that I ever made, I just like, the only distinguishing quality was that my love interest had black hair. But even now, when I'm writing these narrative audios, I try to stay away from that just so that the listener can put themselves in it and not be like taken out of the experience because they're not someone that fits that criteria. And that doesn't mean you keep everything gender neutral. If that's the purpose, then that's wonderful, because you have tags that are distinguishing what exactly the listener is going to be engaging in when they listen to the audio. But that's how I try to keep inclusion at the forefront of my audios.
Just because you brought up the body types and stuff, man, and it happens in books sometimes too, but pink nipples. The vast majority of the world, in fact, does not have those. And it'll be something that will pull people out every single time. In terms of content, another thing I try to stay away from is blushing. If we're keeping things like fairly neutral. So I am fair. I'm light skinned in terms of being black, but I don't blush. And there are people with darker skin tones than I do who do, but I don't. Like, that's my actual lived experience. The only time you will see me turn red is if I've run a few miles or something. Like I don't blush. And so that's something I try to stay away from. And so it gets interesting when you consider the different ways that you can indicate that you are visually seeing something without pulling somebody out of what's going on. In terms of the audio. And Cera, I definitely second what you said about focusing on your experience with someone's body versus trying to describe it back to them. Because in this scenario, I mean, you know what you look like, but maybe you don't know how me as the character in this audio feels about how you look like. And so that's what I'll try and focus on. And then from a more logistical standpoint, I've worked with some script writers, and I've made an effort. All of the script writers I've worked with have come from various marginalized communities, and some of them from racialized communities. And so that's even just from like a more technical standpoint, where it's like, okay, I'm coming up, and I was like, oh my gosh, Quinn invited me to create content on this app. That's amazing. But it's like, okay, well, if I'm coming up, then I'm going to try and bring folks with me, and so try to be very inclusive in terms of my business operations as well.
Yeah, and with that, not only ensuring that the content within the audio itself, the script itself, the experience that you and the listener are having, include diversity and inclusivity aspects, but also having the larger conversations, having conversations with creators, having conversations with the script writers. I know my background in my work is in gender and sexuality studies. That was what my first degree is in. And so being a queer woman making queer audio erotica was always going to be political for me. Always. There was never an option that it was never not going to be political. My work is political. I'm political. I've always been political. So I'm never not going to be having those conversations. I am really good friends with Cera. Her and I have these conversations a lot. About what we can do with the words we say, with the content we create, to further these narratives, because they are important to us. And they may not be important to all creators. That is what it is. But I think making sure you're having conversations, those of us who can and know the dialogue and know the language around diversity and inclusion, use our voices in that way as well. And I love knowing that the audios I make are political. That is so valuable to me. It gives me so much fulfillment in the work that I do, knowing that even if the listener doesn't hear that, I know they're hearing it, and I know that people who need to hear it and want to hear it are hearing it.
Yeah, it's such a great point, and I think from my side of things, I can only it's so important to me as a human being just to sort of always be learning and always have that like openness about like my art and and me as a person. But I think if we're putting things out there, I think we have a responsibility to understand how they're being portrayed and to listen to different points of view. And I always try and do things well-meaningly, but intention's only part of it. And you have to be receptive and open to how things are portrayed. And I think that's so important, to take things on board and adjust accordingly. And all the rest of it. I think I mean, it's a little bit different, but I know that one of the things that I struggled with coming into this was because I came from a narration background and a long prose, and was sort of like my game. I described everything. And not only like artistically is that quite off-putting for a for an audio, it's also, you can get yourself into not being as inclusive as you can be, because you're trying to describe every single thing. And what is there to describe? Well, there's actions that you're doing, and then there's the people who are there in the room and all this sort of stuff. So I think just sort of taking a breather and letting the emotion carry. And I think that's what's so exciting creatively within this format, is that I mean, if you're narrating an audio, but you can't be silent for too long, whereas this is a different game, and actually silence can be really useful and important and enjoyable, actually. So yeah, so there's loads of fun ways to get around it.
Yeah, I think that commentary on kind of the always searching for something better, always trying to do your best, and also continuing on the conversations, especially when you have a platform, is crucial, especially in the world we live in today. And so I think a big part of that is the community that we build around each other. Amanda, Marie, you mentioned your friendship with Cera. I know a lot of you know each other. But I think we have to work on continuously bond building. And so how has the world of audio erotica as a whole, and you can interpret this however you would like, how has that been a community building experience for you? Has it been? I guess is the first question. And if so, how has it been?
I'll talk first this time. I've only been in it a year and a half, and I know Sarah's going to be able to have a different experience having been in it longer, and John's going to have a different we're all having different experiences, how we kind of came here and how we're doing this. There are, 150 of us in the world, at least the world that I know. This is a very small group of people. And as we bring more people in, it gets a little bit bigger. It's so fascinating. It is so fascinating. It's so cool. Because I have a healthcare background. I was a nurse. And you talk about in nursing, like trauma bonding, you're going through these insane experiences together. And that forges a lot of connections because you can relate to your coworkers on these crazy things. And I have found a much safer version of that within the audio erotica community, where we can talk to one another and go, wow, you're having this crazy experience too, because it's so niche, it's so unique. And there's not a lot of people in the world who are doing this. And I think it's really special forging these connections, building these relationships, because it's integral. It is essential to the work itself, but also just on a human personal level. It's necessary so that, relating to the last question, we can all continue to learn and grow, and we can learn from one another, but also feeling a sense of community and safety. And if you're having a concern, having people that you can reach out to and ask for help, who know what you're experiencing and know what's going on, because maybe they've experienced it before. So it is such an important piece of the work that we do.
Actually, that need to kind of validate or just, yeah, I guess big validation, being able to speak to other creators. It took me a little bit to kind of feel like I was starting to get to know people. The community's been very welcome, but because of how easy it is to cross a boundary in this space, I was very wary of trying to push open the door if I wasn't certain that it was open already. But some of those doors have started to very obviously open for me in terms of people being like, hey, yeah, I actually do want to talk about XYZ, ABC. And that has been very encouraging in terms of what it is I feel like I want to do with my content. Especially being somebody out of the panelists, I'm the newest in terms of at least being on the Quinn app, and hopefully they like me and I get to stay, but we'll see what happens. But it's just been such a transformative experience, even more so than becoming an audiobook narrator, which was already very much centralizing, a woman's pleasure or people who don't typically fall within the gender binary. Even looking at those types of things, most of the books that I've done, in addition to having like racialized characters, have had queer characters and being able to explore that. But audio erotica, because of how immersive it is, even as the creator. So it's immersive for the listener, but it's immersive for the creator as well. Because of how immersive that is, it's been an explorative experience for me. And as Amanda said, there's a very small number of people who are going to be able to really talk with you about that. And not just talk with you about it, but empathize with you. So I'm starting to feel like I'm finally like getting my like community roots and them like starting to build out. And that's been really exciting.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing about becoming an audio erotica creator are all the friends that I've made that are also audio erotica creators. Some of my best friends, like Amanda Marie. And I mean, I haven't met Tempest or John until this exact moment. So hi, nice to meet you guys. But yeah, I've met some of the most incredible people because I think it takes a very specific kind of personality to do this kind of work. And so when you get all of us in a room, we all tend to get along like we've known each other for 10 years. It's kind of magical. In terms of the wider community and the listener base of audio erotica, I keep a pretty strong boundary. I think at first, sometimes I would respond to DMs and I'd be like, oh, that's so amazing. Now I don't really do that. I kind of respond broadly online, not to any particular person. And I do read all of the DMs because I feel like it gives really valuable knowledge to understand what people are thinking when they're listening to my audios, and especially if it's a critique of what I'm doing. I've learned a lot just through getting some critiques, especially because like when I started out, like John, I was also describing everything. And I very quickly learned that describing everything takes people out of the audio. And that's something that I got to learn from the comment section on Quinn and DMs on my Instagram and stuff like that. And it just opened up this whole world. Like, I didn't know book talk was a thing. I was actually really not aware of audio erotica. I'm a big reader, but I'm an academic reader, so it's a very different thing. And so it was amazing to get exposed to this and to see that this is not only a budding industry, but it's a budding industry where everybody is eager to embrace everybody within it. And it's like that audience base immediately accepts everyone under the basis that they like the same thing and they're into the same thing. And there's not all this infighting. And so my experience observing the audience has been incredibly positive, and my experience with the creators has been incredibly positive as well.
Yeah, my experience has been very, very similar. And I think one thing I've been, I've over the years sort of felt a little bit of gatekeeping in certain industries that I was working in. And I'm so happy to say that I didn't find that at all with audio erotica, and then sort of coming in as a little bit of a newbie and learning on the road. And, I mean, I've been pushing things out into the ether for as long as I've been sort of self-aware, and had no sort of traction with anything. And then suddenly overnight started getting a lot of responses to things. And it's wonderful when people say nice things, and then, you very quickly start to learn that not everybody's lovely. And you start to get parts of everything that you do picked apart. And I'm quite sensitive, and maybe wasn't fully primed for that. And being able to reach out to members of our community, other creators and things who have been just amazing, so patient, and just was that were able to like walk me through things and give me advice and sort of, you know, and just say the right things to me, and Amanda being one of them. And it's just been, yeah, it's just been a real blessing, and I'm so grateful for it. And it just allowed me to fall in love with this work like so much more than perhaps I would have done. So I mean, I mean, the listeners and the community around it is second to none, but the creators are something else, and just the most wonderful, beautiful human beings you'll ever meet. It really is something.
That is fantastic. And I think, I mean, your points about having something similar to bond over, a unique experience, but one that is not traumatic, like Amanda Marie mentioned, is it sounds very special and very heartening, I guess. You all have been in this industry for very different amounts of time, as we've mentioned. And Tempest, you mentioned kind of how this being in this industry has kind of changed you a little bit and altered how you see things and how you go about things. Is there anything that the rest of you, or Tempest, you're welcome to expand, have noticed about something that you have learned about yourself or the way that you approach the world? Anything that felt transformative for you by being part of this community?
I'll take a second to expand. Um, and so, because nobody has opted in for my own trauma dumping, I will just lightly say that due to experiences I had while I was in the military, um, it was very difficult for me to communicate about the things that I liked, or the things that I wanted, or the things I was interested in trying, or even saying no to things that I wasn't interested in, or that I was worried about or scared about, or anything like that. Um, and so audiobook narration kind of started to open the door a bit, because I was like, oh, you know, it's not so crazy to say it when it's here on the paper in front of me. And not only am I saying it, I'm saying it with feeling. Um, but then stepping even more so, again, kind of into that immersive experience, I've realized that it feels a lot less out of control when I have a script. And I'm like, I'm supposed to say this. I'm not going to go wrong here. And I think that's the fear, right? It helped me realize for myself that there was still a very deep-rooted fear I hadn't fully worked through because of that trauma, that like I was going to do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. Um, and so knowing that has allowed me to be able to communicate that fear. It was a fear that I did not, it was so deep and far down inside of me that I didn't realize it enough to be able to say why it was a struggle for me to communicate about certain things. Um, and so, just on a very personal level, it's been healing in that way, because you can't fix a thing you don't know. If you're not aware of it, you can't fix it. And so that's just been outrageously, in terms of circling back all the way back to sexual wellness where we started, just on a personal level, that's been really helpful for me. And I can only imagine that for people who maybe are coming across audio erotica for the first time, if it helps them in any of those types of veins as well, then I would consider that a job well done.
I think one of the areas that it's affected me, I think it's been a great, I think it's August who says it's a great self-discovery tool, but it's been amazingly self sort of it's been an amazing place for me to shine a light on my own things. And I think I mean, even just not even like talking about sexually, it's like one of the most positive areas of my audios that I've received feedback on is like the listeners feeling heard, and not necessarily in the sexual bits, but in the aftercare bit, it's in the setup and things that people feel or you know, say that they feel listened to and heard and understood and things like that. And I not only did that, obviously, is that lovely to hear, but it allowed me to sort of ask myself, am I actually doing any of this in real life? Am I sort of living up to this version of me? And then obviously you sort of have doubts and things, but then I was able to sort of go, actually, I'm falling quite short of this in real life. And you know, I sort of think, oh, I'm really busy and I've got my head in, you know, all these different areas? Am I being the partner that I want to be? Am I being the friend that I want to be? Am I being all of these things? And it was just a big sort of shock to me, is that how much I was kind of, going, how much was in my life was going unrecognized and sort of, without sort of assessment really that needed it. And then from making those changes, and obviously I'm always growing and nothing's ever fixed, but making those small changes of trying to actively improve that side of my own personality, but the rewards of it in my friendships and in my, closer relationships has been through the roof. And so it was really due to that self-discovery and that kind of like, oh, dude, there's some things here that need to be looked at in your own in the way that you're sort of, you think that you're being nice, but you're not actually hearing people out, and you're not really giving, sharing space and creating, you could create spaces that are safer, as for want of a better word. And I hope that I'm doing at least a better job of that now. But that was a big revelation to me.
You can go.
I was pretty public on my social media about the fact that when I started creating audio erotica, I coincidentally, not by any choice of my own, also became celibate. And it has been fascinating to see that for myself and how that has changed over the past year and a half, because in a way I have created a higher standard and a higher expectation for myself with how I engage with sex. And kind of going back to what I was saying about wanting to make sure that the work I do is political in a sense of inclusivity. I've always wanted to make sure that it's also coming from a place of authenticity, and that what I'm doing is reflective of who I am as a person and my values and my beliefs and my experiences with sex, even if it's not, nothing's directly taken from a real life experience. But in doing so and in having that mindset and framework, it then, like John said, forced me to reflect on how I engage with sex and what my expectations are with sex. And in a way, I, have never been more sexual in my life. I think about sex every day. My work is sex. It's all I talk about. It's something that changes on a week-to-week basis. But my active participation in sex with another person has never been lower in my life. But I also am okay with that because, as Tempest said, it's been super healing. I also have sexual trauma, and having this now little safe bubble around me where I can explore my sexuality safely and talk about it and reflect on it and engage with it in a way that makes me feel safe. I've never been happier. I've never felt better about my relationship with sex. And so it has been immensely transformative. And I know not a lot of listeners are going to know that about me, but I also at least can do this work knowing ethically and knowing morally that the work in itself is coming from somebody who takes great care and great consideration for the listener's experience from a personal experience.
I love that. I always try to infuse my personal experience in as well. And like Amanda and I have talked about this for hundreds of hours probably. But for me personally, I think the most transformative thing, I've always been a very sexual person, and my online brand, whether it was with like comedy or music, what have you, has always been deeply rooted in sex. And when I started doing audio erotica, it required me to, instead of this like outward show, like this very entertainment based expression of sex, to go to a much more vulnerable kind of introspective place. And about 6 months, I'm not going to trauma dump, but I'll give you the quick. About 6 months after I started doing audio erotica, I lost my sex drive. And at first I was like, is it audio erotica that's causing me to lose my sex drive because I'm dumping all of my sexual energy into this? But it wasn't. It was because in creating audio erotica, my mindset had not yet shifted in like what I look like as a sexual human being. And so I was still kind of looking at myself as something to be consumed. And so therefore, as I'm making this stuff and I'm putting it out, I was getting consumed, and my sex drive was getting consumed because I was allowing that to happen. And I got kind of like this dom burnout because I've always also been a very dominant person. And that's where I come, the place I come from with a lot of my audios. And I had this identity crisis. I'm like, I've always been this way. Like, what's happening now? I want to be taken care of and I want to be held and I don't want to have sex. And I'm struggling to understand where I fit in the mix of all of this. And I decided that I was going to explore that a little bit in my audio erotica, and I was going to start making audios that were about like personal healing, healing your view of yourself sexually, healing yourself from your past experiences sexually, almost kind of like guided meditations with like masturbation as a fixture of it. And through that, I actually was able to repair my sexual relationship with myself. And sometimes I'd even listen to my own audios shamelessly because it was like, this is what I want to hear. This is what I need to hear to heal. And so I'm sure other people will need that to heal as well. And so now, you know, almost 2 years since that whole thing happened, I now have this incredible separation from it where like my identity is not synonymous with the sexual parts of my being, and I'm able to view audio erotica as like an extension and an art form, but not part of me that's being consumed by the public. And it's changed the way I show up in the world as a whole even.
That is a wonderful, wonderful explanation, all of you, about how audio erotica can bring personal growth and a lot of introspection. Actually, I'm ending with individual questions for all of you. And Cera, your discussion just now leads perfectly into what the question for you is, which is, you're also a musician and a singer, and you've done many concerts in front of live audiences. What elements of performance do you use when you're creating your audios? And how are the experiences of putting out two different types of art forms similar or different?
What a wonderful question. I think the most common through line when it comes to performing as a musician and performing as an audio erotica creator is infusing yourself into the art without allowing the art to become you and attaching your identity to it. I think when you're able to take a step back and it's like, this is part of me, but this isn't all of me, you're able to create better art and your work is able to continuously evolve and improve. So I would say that's the biggest through line. I would say the biggest difference is the fact that when I'm performing in front of even some of the biggest audiences that I have, like 8,000 people, right? And that feels massive. And you can see that and you can touch that and experience that. The gravity of how many people are listening, it hits you and you get this incredible exchange of energy. And it's like you're all there in this moment. With audio erotica, uh, I have audios that have like 100,000 listens, and I can't even conceptualize what that would look like in front of me. And so it's like I'm touching so many more people with this art that I'm making than just like a live concert experience. And sometimes I forget about that exchange of energy that's still happening, even though these people are not in front of me in the room. And so being mindful about what that relationship means to me and what that means to them and what I need to do to preserve my own energy for myself when my audios are touching so many people.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Is on the one hand, you have this community and you're aware of it, and then on the other hand, they're very different forms of perceiving how many people are there and how many lives are being potentially changed, whether it's through music or through audio erotica. And yet I think it's also, very important to, again, like you mentioned before, recognize both of them as art forms that you put yourself into, and recognizing that with any art, it's important to make sure that you're taking care of yourself first, and you're not letting, you talked a lot about consumption. You're not letting the world consume you. So that is a wonderful insight. Thank you. You also kind of touched a little bit on the sort of boundaries that we have with each other and how we navigate those, and that leads into Amanda Marie's question. So thank you for making my job easy. About you have this brand around the phrase "not flirting, just hot and talking," and I love that phrase. I think it's a great, way of recognizing, the way that people often get perceived, and then it's like based on, aesthetics. How do we interpret people? And so, what I would like to ask you is, what about this phrase inspires you? And then, how do you navigate the experiences where people assume that you're flirting, especially when the boundaries between your personal and your professional life are pushed?
Yeah, I mean, even once a week, I have to remind myself of that phrase. Like, it has become such a huge through line for my relationship with the work that I do, because I, my brand is me, it's public. And even before getting into this work specifically, but I was doing content creation, I had to learn that. I had to learn that I'm putting out a 60-second video, and that 60 seconds compared to the entire other time in my life is going to be consumed by people, and people that it becomes not me. It becomes a face on a screen. And that's a extremely important distinction that needs to be made if you're going to be a content creator. You can be as authentic as you want. You could be as genuine and honest as you want. But at the end of the day, you become a face on the screen. And as I said, I have to remind myself sometimes once a week, I'm not flirting, I'm hot and talking, because I will find myself in a conversation with somebody, unfortunately, most often a man, where I'm just being Amanda. It's not on a screen, it's just a real life conversation. And I am aware that I'm being perceived as a sexual person. I'm being perceived as a performative person. I can tell now so quickly when somebody is talking to me, Amanda, or Amanda Marie, the content creator, and they themselves don't even realize that they're doing it. So having that boundary where I can go, hey, I can tell you're speaking to me this way because you're attracted to me, because you have a sense of thinking you know who I am, or that because the work that I do is synonymous with my personal identity. They're two separate things. This is work. This is my job. The audios I make, the content I create is work. It is labor. And I have a good sense of that distinction between my personal identity and my private life, my private relationships, and that public focus. And so that phrase, hot and talking, has helped that boundary for me, because before I was a public figure, I don't think it didn't come up as significantly as it does now. But now that my listener base is growing, my content platforms are growing, it is a essential reminder that I'm allowed to exist as a woman. I am allowed to exist as a sexual being. I am allowed to create sexual content that doesn't have to be the whole pie. There can be other slices of the pie of my identity. And I'm also allowed to say things and do things and be who I am, even if I know, and this gets a little bit meta and I won't get too far down this rabbit hole, but even if I know that I'm creating content where I'm like, no, this is me just being authentic right now, it doesn't matter to the viewer, because to them it's all the same. And so I consistently have to remind myself that the way I'm perceived and the way I'm sexualized sometimes has nothing to do with me. And I have to remember who I am. I have to remember what matters to me, what is valuable to me, what is important to me, and who my identity is separate from the social media. I know that's such a broad answer to a question about such a simple phrase, but in truth, over the past, I made that first video back in 2021. I was visiting Toronto, Canada, and it took on a life of its own. And in the past almost 4 years, 4.5 years since then, it has changed for me. My relationship with that phrase and its meaning has changed, and I like will continue to identify with it, I think, for a long time.
I think it's a phrase that a lot of people can identify and have that same reaction to, especially as a woman living in the world where there's unfortunately a lot of a male gaze, recognizing that, as you said, other people's perceptions of me is not on me. I can present myself as authentically as I would like in all of the different ways that I would like. But at the end of the day, it is not my responsibility to make sure that everyone knows who I am and has access to myself. So that was really well said. And thank you for sharing. We're almost out of time, so I'll quickly change gears. So John, you host the podcast, The Audiobook Club with John York, where you've spoken with fellow audio erotica creators, audiobook narrators, authors, more, all kinds of wonderful, wonderful people. What have your discussions with so many members of the erotica and narration communities taught you about the audio erotica industry as a whole? Has anything, affected the way you approach your work, whether that's a phrase someone has said that has stuck with you or anything else?
Yeah, oh my gosh, there's so much. I started that podcast like 5, 6 years ago, because I didn't know anybody in this field, and there were people that I admired so much, like voice acting and audiobook narration, all that sort of stuff that I admired so much, who were like living in Los Angeles, which might as well have been Mars to me. I live in a town where there's more sheep than people. So it was the idea that, I genuinely, this hand on heart, I didn't know anybody in real life who enjoyed their job. Nobody, not a single person in real life who was happy with how they spent their day, right? So that being said, it was really important to me that if I was going to convince, the people around me that I was going to try and do something that brought a smile to my face, might have to meet someone else who did it. So who was on the sort of same path. So that was where the podcast came from. Never believed that anyone had listened to it, which is nice that they do now. But it's still for that reason of it. It just became, a way. You can't just email somebody and go like, "Hey, can I ask you like 10 million questions of how you became you?" But you can if you have a podcast. It gives you permission to do that, and you can ask all the questions that you want to know. And so yeah, that's sort of how it started. And I ended up getting loads of jobs through it and stuff. So it was great professionally. And I got some work with Disney through it, which I think led to like a load of romance books, which weirdly enough, and then which then ended up with me on Quinn and all that sort of stuff. So it's been really good for me professionally. But then when Quinn started, or I started on Quinn per se, again, I found myself in a field where I didn't know anybody in real life who did it. And there were all these people that I really admired. And I knew that I had a lot to learn in order, if I was going to create good work and I was going to, do things that I was, make me proud. I needed to learn more about this thing. So again, I reverted back to the podcast thing. So I reached out to a bunch of people and got chatting. And not only did I find that they were amazing people, and it led to, friendships and all this crazy stuff. I just learned so much about everything, not only just like how to deal with things or like how to, so I say there's no roadmap to this life. It's so new. And, as we've said a few times on this, is only like, relatively a handful of people who do it. So everybody's kind of doing their own version of this. So it's so interesting to go, okay, well, this person's absolutely smashing like the social media thing. This person's absolutely, creates the most wonderful, inclusive story, all this sort of thing. So you can go, for me, it's like I was able to sort of have a chat with people and sort of take little bits of nuggets and advice and try and, do it. And I remember Tom York, who unfortunately I'm not actually related to, but I love to bits, said that straight away we were talking about like ways that working on Quinn has changed him as a person, and he said, "Oh, I realized that that serving is incredibly masculine. And now, as somebody who grew up in that sort of toxic masculine environment, I get that I got that phrase immediately because I lived it, and all of my friends were, with that kind of, and it was that energy that I was brought up in. And if you showed any kind of quote unquote weakness, you didn't belong in this field. I got that so much, that whole mindset and how that's toxic for you and for everyone around you resonated with me straight away. So the fact that when Tom was like, I realized that serving is actually incredibly masculine, incredibly rewarding, it was like a light switch for me. It was like, oh my God, I can be proud of this way that I feel. And I do a lot of submissive audios and things. And it was like, it made me, because you have somebody who's incredibly successful in what they do and very sort of, a confident person as they should be, saying that how I feel is okay. And as someone as insecure as me, that's incredibly rewarding and needed, So yeah, and there's just been loads of instances that are similar to that, but it's just changed. It's changed everything for me. So yeah, I'm really, really grateful for it.
Yeah, that brings us back to the community points that we were talking about earlier, is the strength that we find within each other and how we complement each other with the things that we didn't even know we needed. And then someone else will come along and it's just an aha moment, Tempest, I'd like to end with you and discussions on diversity and inclusion again, because I think that is just such an important topic, especially nowadays. And you're a creator of audio erotica, an author, and a narrator in the romance book industry. And you're someone who does DEI work in the publishing industry. So you work on destigmatizing erotica and romance from multiple angles. What is similar across these industries and what is different? What has your experience been in bringing diverse and inclusive romance narratives into the public sphere?
Okay, so I'm going to start with so far what I've seen that's different. And I think that by far it's more publicly, like widely acceptable to write porn or sexually explicit content within a wider plot than it is to engage with sexually explicit content in basically any other form, at least as a professional. And so I would say, like I've poked around on like the user generated content forums and stuff like on Reddit and whatnot. But for the most part, I think that I've still seen more diverse and inclusive stories in publishing more so than I have in audio erotica. But I think most of that just has to do with how old audio erotica is as an industry as compared to publishing. And so I'm hoping, as I'm seeing like the fact that I'm being included from the outset, I'm hoping is a sign that audio erotica is going to be a lot more flexible of an industry, because even though I'm seeing more diverse and inclusive stories in publishing at this time, publishing's been around forever and they're just now getting around to it, right? So like it's not necessarily a feather in their cap that I say that, right? And so as a narrator, we're seeing a lot more publishers tap marginalized authors to meet the demand for what we call own voices audiobooks, and that's been really good as well. Now, in terms of what they have in common, and like circling to that like destigmatization point, the romance genre in publishing and Quinn and audio apps like it, they tend to center a woman's pleasure or the pleasure of other marginalized groups, as the case may be, and that's outrageously important. And we've said it, for the male gaze and for the female gaze, and of course those are pretty binary terms, but I think we all understand what we're talking about when we say those things. But I think that the focus on the so-called female gaze helps us interrogate the Madonna whore complex that's been forced on us by the patriarchy. And it's the same patriarchy that has created the tabooness around porn, where they want you to need it and want it while at the same time feeling deep shame around it. And then they exploit that about you. And that's where those negative associations and whatnot come from in the first place. But I think with what like the romance genre is doing and what audio erotica is doing and other alternative forms of porn are doing, are showing that you can be a great doctor, a great parent, a great teacher, a great personal trainer, and enjoy sex. And we can all have a good time. And so I think that in this space, and like I said, it's very encouraging to me to see so many marginalized creators and marginalized points of view, i.e., whether it's like, femme for femme type audio or femme for non-binary, that the fact that these marginalized identities and marginalized perspectives are being included pretty much at the outset, when you consider again how old it is, I think helps further destabilize these interconnected systems of oppression that white patriarchy is basically woven into. It's built into the fabric. And for me as a creator, as a human being, because Amanda, I very much resonate with what you said about being political. My existence is politicized from damn near every facet of my existence. And so it's in full alignment with my ideals to step up to the plate to carve out space for marginalized people, whether it's an author or publisher asking me to evaluate a manuscript, being asked to narrate diverse and inclusive audiobooks, or being invited by an app like Quinn to create audio erotica, particularly targeting queer audience, because all of my erotica is femme for femme. So I think that audio erotica has the potential to do what publishing has been struggling to do for years, and I very much hope that they stay the course.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Yeah, I love the way that you said that. And we are a little bit over time, but I wanted to say thank you so much to all of you for being here. This has been a wonderful experience. Thank you to the, oh, you have we are out of time. The question, sorry. But thank you for being here. Thank you to our audience members for being here. I hope you have a wonderful evening. And yeah, thank you so much.